We're now live, Chair.
Thank you very much. So welcome everybody to the meeting this evening, performance strategy and performance meeting. Welcome members and welcome any members of the public who decided to join us this evening. I'd like to start by asking whether we've got any substitutes nominated for the particular meeting.
No apologies or substitutions have been received, Chair.
Thank you very much. That's good. Just to remind,
give Councillor Scullion's apologies.
Right. Thank you very much. Is that noted?
We don't record guest councillors' apologies. It's just the members of the board, Chair.
Yes, of course. But thank you for letting us know anyway. So members' interest, we have to remind members of the need to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests or other interests they might have in relation to the items included on the agenda. Does anybody wish to declare any particular interest at this time? If not, please do so if you feel it's appropriate, if and when. Okay. Admission of the public. It's not recommended that the public is excluded from this meeting for the consideration of the business on the agenda. So as we say, we've got no items which are restricted in any way. Let's start with the main item on the agenda, first main item, which is the minutes of the last meeting on the 4th of August. Members will have received copies of those. Does anybody have any comments, questions or alterations they would like to suggest? Can't see anybody. Shout up if so. No, I'm assuming not then, so we'll accept those minutes. Thank you very much. Though all those in favour of accepting the minutes, I guess we should vote, should we not? All in favour? Thank you very much. We'll accept those minutes and move on to the first item on the agenda, item 5 after that, which is the elections. We're getting a report on how they went, what went right, what went wrong, if anything, of course. And I think Ian, or no, it's Michelle, isn't it, that's actually going to do this. Michelle and Janine are going to report on this one.
Yeah, hi, Councillor.
Would you like to fire away on this then, please?
Yep, thank you very much. Yeah, hopefully members have had a chance to have a look through the report. I'll just go through briefly, and if anybody's obviously any questions or anything they want to ask in and amongst or at the end, obviously feel free. So the elections this year, I just have to say, were, and it says in the report, the most challenging that we've ever experienced in our service. And I've worked for Calderdale for quite some time now. We had the elections from last year, the postponed elections, with a couple of double ward vacancies, some parish elections, and of course the West Yorkshire Combined Authority Mayor, amidst the uncertainty of whether the elections were going to go ahead at all under the COVID circumstances. So as usual, we began planning very early on in September 2020, a lot of work undertaken with other local authorities and public health to make sure that we got this right. To make electors aware, we did a write out in February to all our electorate to give them the various information about how voting was going to take place in Calderdale, and to give options of postal voting to make sure, and proxy voting to make sure that electors were aware of the options available to make sure that they could actually vote on the day in person or by post. As an action of doing that, our postal votes increased by nearly a quarter. So we've jumped from nearly, say, 36,000 postal votes to 46,000, which was, you know, quite a large increase, not quite as high as some of our neighbouring authorities, but for our area, it was a good increase for us. So polling took place on election day, obviously, 119 polling stations. And as you can see from page 3 of the report, that the team worked an awful lot of hours above and beyond what we had to do to make sure that the elections went ahead on the day without really many very issues on the day itself. The main issues, obviously, we were looking at scrutiny was an issue of a postal vote. So the deadline for postal vote applications was the 20th of April. All the postal votes that we received, so that's an additional 11,000 from what we normally have, were processed. They were all received, all those on time were processed on time and acknowledged. Any late ones we wrote to electors and said, you know, if you were too late, you would have to go and vote in person, so everybody was aware of what they needed to be doing. Postal Vote opening sessions were arranged as usual. We worked from the leisure centre over a number of rooms to ensure that we could do this in a timely manner under COVID restrictions to make sure that everybody was safe. Just a note on the report there that the postal votes, whilst there was an increase in postal votes by around 11,000, our overall response this year was higher than what we've had in previous years, with a huge almost 75% response in postal votes, which was excellent. We had a return of nearly 34,500 postal votes counted this year. We were aware of issues. Sorry.
In 1 second there, I think Ian's got his hand up. Is that
sorry.
we need to take on board at the minute, Ian?
No, at the end, please, Councillor, once Michelle has finished the introduction.
Sorry, Michelle, I just didn't want to. I thought it.
No, sorry, I didn't see his hand up.
No.
Not concentrating. Yeah, so the postal votes that we issued in 3 runs because of the amount and because of the issues with a high amount and obviously printer capacity. We always send our files in a number of runs to make sure that we can get the biggest amount of postal votes out as quickly as possible, which we always do this. So our original file were due to be dispatched on the 19th of April, but they didn't go out until the 21st of April. And this was just due to capacity at the printer with a huge amount of elections, one that they had running, and the huge amount, a number of postal vote packs that they had to prepare for all the authorities. There are only a handful of printers that are capable of doing election material. So it's not like we could kind of spread this out. We had to go to, to the printer that we use. So we were aware that the first run did go out a couple of days later than we expected. However, it was only the day after the close, which was still quite good to get rid of over 40,000 postal vote packs. The second run of around 4,000, they went out on the Sunday, the 25th. So they'll gone to the downstream access on the Monday. And then the last file that we sent, which was just over 1,000, they again went a little later than we expected, which was what caused the delay from our end to start with the delivery of the postal votes. With a combination of issues with Royal Mail, also with the amount that were going out and COVID issues and staffing issues, we did become aware that a few of these packs kind of weren't landing as quickly as we expected, but under the circumstances, and we can see the response we did get back that, in general, everybody received the postal vote. We were aware of a number of people that, and this was not particularly in one area, this was quite sporadic, that people's postal votes weren't landing or people had not got them. So what we did, we arranged for an officer to go out over the weekend prior to the election to deliver any packs that we were aware of where people hadn't got the postal vote, and where he could, he would wait for those. So we made sure we got them back on time, with it being the bank holiday on the Monday. What we've learned from that, the postal vote issues for the last couple of years, we've used Whistle, which is what the council's downstream access service is for posting out our post. We don't use Royal Mail only for first class envelopes. So we've used Whistle for a couple of years now. What we've learned is that you can't track very well the post. So it's a better service for tracking with Royal Mail. So in the past, we've used Whistle. For going forward, although it will be at higher cost, we're going to go back to using Royal Mail for sending the postal votes out, because yes, they'll get there possibly a day earlier, but it's the tracking issue that at least we can see exactly where everything's gone, because it did become apparent that that was more difficult using the downstream access provider. The count went quite well. We had to count over 3 days because of we've got the mayoral election. We'd use a combined ballot box. You have to verify all the ballot papers before you can move on to the count. And for COVID, we liaised with public health. We had to make sure that everybody was kept safe. So we did do the count over Friday, Saturday and Sunday, which I think were, although it did take a long time, it worked well and everybody was kept safe, and, the results were accurate at the end of the day. Sunday, let's have a look. Going forward, issues that we're looking at from going forward, obviously we'll be starting planning for next year's elections pretty soon. One issue that we are considering is, and obviously we don't know for sure yet whether the plans for Northbridge are going to go ahead, but if those plans are agreed and do go ahead, then we will need to look for an alternative venue to hold the count. So we'll start looking at that pretty soon as a backup plan, contingency plan, as well as, putting plans in place if we need to hold the count for next year's elections elsewhere. Other things we've got on the cards, we're aware that the Local Government Boundary Commission will be conducting an electoral review of Calderdale Council pretty soon, along with some other neighbouring authorities. So that's on the horizon for us. And then obviously, again, not sure what's happening yet until this bill's gone through all the stages, but we've got the electoral bill coming through with a number of electoral administration changes for us, which will bring about a massive amount of work for our service going forward. And until we know the detail of that, obviously we're unsure on how we're going to manage that, but we will possibly be asking for extra resources to help us through this, depending on what's agreed. I'll just get that in there. Depending on what's agreed when that bill's passed, it's going to be quite a significant change for us. Yeah, I think in short.
The next item is revenue monitoring, so that might come up there.
Yeah, yeah, please. Obviously, we start with the planning for the elections. We're in the middle of the canvass at the moment. As you know, we've had a couple of by-elections last week. We've got some potential neighbourhood planning referendums on the horizon, the Halifax bid renewal, and then, planning as usual. So it's kind of been non-stop for electoral services throughout the the pandemic and going forward. It's been quite a busy year. So I think, considering what we went through and how much extra work we put in to get to the election, the real issue was things out of our control. The postal votes not arriving quite as timely as they would under normal circumstances. However, printers being stretched by the sheer amount of printing they had to do, Royal Mail being stretched by COVID. I am aware that Royal Mail, they always do prioritise the delivery and the receipt of postal votes coming back. So for us, I think all in all, we reissued 156 postal vote packs, which in the grand scheme of things, was pretty good, and all electors that we were aware of received the postal vote. And I think the response to postal vote returns shows that. Yep. So without me reading, the report through word for word, if that's a reasonable overview.
Absolutely, thank you.
Any questions?
Yeah, really just to say as well, well done on it, in that there were lots of problems with the postal votes, and councillors were getting pestered saying, I haven't got my vote from various people. But I was particularly impressed by the way people were sent out and posting them through doors for people. I think that was a really good service under very difficult circumstances. Ian, you wanted to come in, I think, though, on this one. Did you want to add stuff?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to publicly acknowledge the resilience, professionalism, commitment and dedication of the elections team, but particularly Michelle and Janine. They dealt with a complex set of elections which were unprecedented, as Michelle has said. And that standard that they achieved is not a one-off. They do it regularly. The work they put in for the council is not taken for granted, but it is remarkable in the way that they continue to deliver the service and put the hours in to ensure that democracy is as well served as it is in Calderdale. So my thanks, and I'm sure the thanks of all members.
I would second that, Ian. I think that's very appropriate. And I think to a certain extent we do presume, don't we? But the reason we presume is because it runs so well normally. So you just expect it to carry on running normally. So it sounds like a backhanded compliment, but I think you know exactly what we mean. Because it runs so well the vast majority of the time, we just assume it will. And it does. Thank you.
Thank you.
On that. Any other questions on the report from other members? Councillor Press, I saw you first, and then Bob.
Okay, there are a couple of things I'd like to raise, if I may. If I could just first echo the big thanks that the work you put in very difficult circumstances, which is absolutely extraordinary. So thank you for that, Michelle.
Thank you.
I currently, the first thing, I suppose the first issue which springs to mind from the report really is the fact of the venue for the count, which is very concerning. Because it would seem to me that if we're saying the Shay, I was at the count, the EU election count at the Shay, and I take on board what you're saying. But I wonder whether it's been discussed whether you could revert back to how just maybe as this year, as a one-off. In the old days, the counts used to be, for example, the Upper Valley ones would be in the Upper Valley, and the Lower Valley ones would be in the Lower Valley. They would be actually in the ward, and they would be on the nights. And I wondered whether that option, like for example, I remember going to a count 20 years ago at Tomden Town Hall, which of course has just been done up and all the rest of it. So it's sort of sitting there. So I just wondered if that had been looked at as a possibility. The other issue I wanted to raise, which isn't in the report actually, is I have the joy of doing the Mark Register. We for political reasons, we'll get a copy of the Mark Register. And one thing that's absolutely clear is that there's some areas where, because of the lack of proximity to the polling station, the nearer people are to the polling station, the more likely they are to vote. I wondered if electoral services do look at the proportion of people. I mean, I've noticed it's quite striking, the proportion of people who vote in relation to how near the polling station is, because it has seemed to me for a long time that a lot of people who aren't near enough to a polling station just don't vote, particularly in areas where people may not necessarily have cars, where there are lots of old people, et cetera, that we're not really maybe, I know there's been a drive to get away from the traditional use of schools. Could we maybe look at that, at how many people are voting and where, and try and make polling stations not just more accessible in terms of physically accessible, but also accessible in terms of how far away they are from where the majority of people live. And finally, on the ID issue, that's another concern. That would mean presumably we need to step up the campaign to get people to vote by post. But secondly, we would have a huge campaign around that when the time comes. I'm sorry to put all those things and shuffle them up, but these are issues that have concern.
You're spoiling all my points, Sue.
It's fine.
Chair, if I could just deal with the Northbridge issue first. There is a process to go through, and that isn't yet a decision that has been taken. So as normal, electoral services are contingency planning and looking at scenarios that give rise to the need to have counting take place elsewhere. We do that anyway, even under normal circumstances where we anticipate there being an issue with not being able to use Northbridge. So Michelle will come on and deal with the specific point, Councillor Press, about counting in wards. But members, if you just bear in mind that the North Bridge issue, there's a long way to travel on that just yet, and it isn't confirmed, nor is the timing of that.
You want to come back on that, Sue? Or are you just not taking your hand down? Sorry, Sue, I was saying you'd forgotten to take your hand down, yeah? Okay. Were you going to come in on that one then, Michelle?
Yeah, fine, yeah. So in relation to the counts, obviously we don't know next year yet until we do know what's happening with the leisure centre, and we use the shares of contingency for the European parliamentary election, and it is very tight, and it was obviously less spectators, if you like, candidates, etc. So if we did have to look there, we'd have to look at how we do that. But we are looking at other premises as well. In relation to moving things back to the wards, I do remember that. I used to work in elections back in 1985 and did my first count in the town hall canteen. I do remember that. We had to stop doing that because of postal voting on demand. If we counted through the night, postal votes, we're getting 40,000 back. They take a lot of time to process, and we don't have the staff members with all the different issues and legislation to deal with to spread those staff members. Now we've got postal vote on demand like that into all the different areas, but it's something that we will look at and discuss with the returning officer if and when the need arises. In terms of polling stations and locality, we do undertake a polling district review. We're obliged to do that every 5 years. We report that through to governance business, which goes to full council. We are looking at premises at the moment. We had to through the election period because we couldn't use some of the schools. There was a timely letter that came through once all the poll card data had been fined up to say you can't use some of these schools now. So that was an issue for us. The problem we have is in some areas there are just there could be one building. And I would say if anybody is aware of other buildings, you know, to please let us know, because we do go out and look. We do try and place them centrally, but it's not always possible to do that. Where there may be several buildings in one polling district, some are more accessible than others. They might be a little bit further away than the centre, but they might have the disabled access. So there are a number of things that we have to look at, and the Electoral Commission do give us guidance on what we should be looking at when we're doing a polling district review. We do have to do another full one in a couple of years' time, but that's not to say we don't always look at things, which we do. So we do address that. But what we do is we make sure that everybody is aware that where the polling station is with a map on the poll card. We provide every elector with a postal vote application with the poll card. We let every elector know that if there isn't disabled access, which is in very few of our polling stations now. So we do give the electorate plenty of opportunity to say, well, that's fine, I can't get there, it's too far, I'll have a postal vote instead, or a proxy vote. But we are continually looking at polling stations, and we do want to get that right, obviously, to make sure that people do go out and vote. I'm not sure that we could undertake a look at all the marked registers. We don't see the marked registers, obviously they're for your use to kind of identify where the voting patterns are. That's something that we can't really get involved with, but we do look at the premises and we will continually review that process. What was the other one? The polling district review, marked registers, the counts. Oh, the ID, yeah. Obviously, as soon as we know what's going through with this bill, there will be lots of work done by the government and the Electoral Commission. That, you know, it's them that this will go through legislation, and we will obviously be helping with that to make sure that all our electors know what's going on. But there will be a huge campaign that the Electoral Commission no doubt will run, you know, to make sure that everybody knows what's going on if that goes through.
Yeah, and I think on that particular point of the ID one, I think it really is important, isn't it? That yes, there's a whole list of possible forms of ID, but people really need to know what the options are. Yeah. And if they've got them, they really need to know what the alternatives are, so we don't disenfranchise people. So
absolutely.
Yeah, we'll agree. The publicity thing is critical once we know what's being put forward. Sorry.
Which is where extra work will fall into our office, because we're going to have to supply some sort of, well, it looks like, obviously, until we know for sure, there'll be some sort of ID that we're going to have to issue from our office. So yeah, but until we know the finer detail, it's difficult to comment.
It's just a heads up on it, I suppose, really, isn't it? Yeah. I've got Bob, Stephen, then Megan. So Bob, do you want to come in?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, just like the other speakers, I just want to say to start with, thank you for the wonderful, to the elections team for the wonderful job they've done this last year in those extraordinary circumstances. I know they're difficult every year, so much work involved, but this last year has been said, extraordinary amount of work with everything what's been happening. So it's fantastic to read the report and seeing just what's happened there. Just on postal vote delivery delays, I've had a postal vote for many years, and it's good to hear that you've looked at this matter urgently and now taking some action on this. I mean, I was just on the verge of contacting the elections team, because it was, I think, 6 or 7 days. Normally we receive it quite a long time in advance, and this time it was getting right up to the deadline. But just as I was going to contact the elections office, it arrived, so that was fine. But certainly there were real problems, I know there, and some didn't get them at all on time. But you made a lot of effort to make sure everybody that needed one had one. I know that you've talked about the potential loss of North Bridge, and it may or may not have to find alternatives. I know it's ongoing. I'm sure it's been looked at. It's not a building in our ownership, but I'm sure one large building that I am aware of, visited quite a number of times, is the Calderdale College Sports Hall. That is a large building, and I just wondered if that was possible and big enough if North Bridge wasn't available. And finally, on voter ID, there's a lot going on at the moment with the bill going through the Parliament. A lot of concern we all know about regarding these proposals on voter ID, but I know we're not discussing in the depth on those tonight, but there is a lot of real concerns about that and the need for this kind of extraordinary additional work involved on that, which is going to cause a lot of concerns and a lot of work to yourselves. I'm particularly though interested in the accessibility improvements, because I think that possibly a very good thing, particularly I think for improve the electoral process for people with disabilities, as you say, and I can see that being quite a big job. For, the responsibility put on the returning officer to improve the facilities for people with disabilities. So that's a positive thing. I'll be interested, to see how that goes through later. Could I just ask on overall this on this on the bill that's going through? I'm sure it's not been said, but is there any indication about what additional funding is going to come through from the implications on local authorities because of the work that we'll have to do to implement this?
I think not specifically, but there is generally, when individual registration came in, there was funding to start with, and then it kind of gets lesser and lesser, and it is involved, with whatever we get in the first place. So there will be something, and obviously that'll be fed back what we do get when we know the finer detail of what actually goes through, but there will be some funding to start with.
Okay.
In regard to the Calderdale College, we have looked up there. We've looked at some of the schools as well, but because the elections are in May, it generally falls with exam time, and they don't, they just don't want to touch us. But any ideas anybody gets will be greatly received. We'll look into it.
It's probably one of the biggest buildings in Calderdale to hold something like that. Yes, I appreciate. Just hadn't thought about it tying with elections.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that, Bob. Stephen, you were next on the list. Councillor Lee, do you want to come in, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, first of all, I must echo the previous comments about Michelle and the team. Absolutely marvellous. I'm not sure whether we mentioned this in this meeting before or elsewhere, but I've certainly said that the circumstances surrounding the May election were so extraordinary. Everybody hopes it will be a one-off. So where there were slight glitches, such as what happened with the postal vote, hopefully is very unlikely to occur again. It was really strange. And indeed, maybe if that was somewhat unrepresentative, I think the recent by-elections were more representative of just what Michelle and her team can do, because they were absolutely faultless. And so the additional congratulation I'd like to offer you, Michelle, and all your team, is not just at the time of the election itself, but beforehand. You answer queries. Your department always answers the phone. That's not to say that others don't, but you do. And it's very, very helpful. And the level of expertise that you possess in this subject, great. And so, with respect to all the healthy discussion we've had this evening about things that need to be looked at, North Bridge and all of that thing, venue, I want to say to you and your team that I have every confidence that whatever it is that changing legislation throws our way, that you will be absolutely on the ball and you'll go from strength to strength. So thank you again for your excellent work. Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't think that needs a response, really, does it?
No, thank you.
Okay, Megan, got around to you.
Sorry about that. The mute was doing silly things to me. I mean, I can't not say what a good job you've done, Michelle, and your team, when everybody else is saying it. But I think I've said it before this meeting on a number of occasions. And it wasn't just the things that you had to do. When I got in touch because of one of our councillors, or candidates she might have been then, had a disability problem. Because she knew in advance, you know, she just came in a motorised wheelchair and there was no fuss at all. She could get to where she wanted to be, and that was very appreciated. And the chair you got me was as well. But I don't know how many people here realise that some wards are now won on the postal votes. You know, we've had people win on the day and still lose. So it goes to show how much people are using them. So, yeah, thank you very much, Michelle.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and an idea, an idea of somewhere to go. The chair and the stairs, there's two big rooms up there.
Yeah.
And if they don't behave, you could put them on pitch.
Yeah, marquee on the pitch. That'd be good.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Swift. Councillor Porritt, I think you had a hand raised as well.
I did, last minute hand.
Sorry.
I mean, really, I'm just going to keep just heaping praise, to be perfectly honest. My particular memory, actually, of the elections team, and I know what a small team you are as well, which makes what you do all the more remarkable. My particular memory was a Saturday before Christmas in 2019, when I'd parked, you know, to walk up into Halifax and walk past the door of the elections office, and it was getting dark. The lights were all on inside, and everybody was working because there was a snap general election, and just that dedication. Whenever I think of the elections team, I always picture you in there with all the lights on as everybody else is doing their Christmas shopping, working really hard. And really, on following on from that, I'd like to ask, could we as a board arrange for a letter to go to the whole of the elections team? Obviously, you know, Michelle's been here hearing our fulsome thanks, but if we could arrange for formal thanks to be sent from this board to the whole of the team, just to, it's not much, but just to kind of formally show our appreciation for the hard work, because it's not just been the unprecedented recent election, it's been all the previous out of cycle general elections and all of that. Your feet haven't touched the ground since about 2015, I would have thought.
No.
So it's, yeah, just to say that we appreciate just how hard you're working, and yeah, if I mean, I'd like to see it a bigger team if it could be, but obviously funding is funding, and you know, that's another issue. But yeah, just to pass on our thanks. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Victoria, I would certainly second your suggestion about the letter. I think that would be very appropriate from the board, if that can be arranged by somebody, please. Good. So thanks. Thank you, Michelle, for the report, and those who contributed towards it, and your colleagues as well, please.
Thank you very much.
Good. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Moving on to item 6, the revenue monitoring. That is the usual gentleman, Nigel, is going to give us the headlines on this one. I haven't seen you yet.
Hopefully I'm
You're there.
present, and hopefully this time you can hear me.
Yes, we can. So please take us through the highlights.
Okay, in terms of, very briefly, then, the highlights of the first quarter revenue monitor for the current financial year. What it's, well, the face of it, the forecast for the year is a £9.5 million overspend. However, £5.3 million of that relates to COVID related, either additional costs in the case of adult social care, for example, or loss of income, in particular relating to sports and parking. Those will be funded by government grants that were brought forward from previous years in relation to COVID. So the net overspend forecast for the council, stripping out all those COVID related expenses, is £4.2 million. Directors have in place actions which they're confident of reducing that forecast down to £2.6 million by year end. On top of that, there is a grant, a social care grant, that was given to the council as part of the local government finance settlement of £1.1 million, specifically for social care, but not necessarily for either adults or children's social care. It could be either. So we actually ring-fenced it to both at the start of the year. So £2.6 million of forecast overspend with the application of that grant would come down to £1.5 million overspend by year end. And I hope everybody's following that.
Yes.
So we started off with quite a very large number, and the forecast is that the net spend at the end of the year will be about £1.5 million over the budget. Now, clearly, I'm working with directors through individual sessions and through budget challenge meetings to reduce that to as close to zero, to as close to the budget as possible by year end. But the main budget pressures, in addition to those that are COVID related, as I mentioned before, parking and sports in particular, the loss of income on those, but some ongoing existing budget pressures around demand and costs on all age disability clients, in particular looked after children, and in particular external placements, and transport requirements for special educational needs children. Those are probably the biggest budget pressures within the council, as I say, non-pandemic related at the moment. And that's where I'm concentrating effort with the directors to try and address those as much as we can, obviously reflecting the fact that some of those reflect things outside our control in terms of the number of people that require services, but looking at the trends and the finances of those in particular with directors over the course of the year. So as I say, that's a brief summary where we started off with quite a prudent view of the scale of potential overspending at the course of the year, but netting that down to about £1.5 million once we've applied all the funding that's been made available to the council this year.
Thank you, Nigel. I mean, one of the things which always sort of niggles at the back of my mind is the savings we've been making during the past year and the knock-on effect of that. Have I missed some reference to that, or is that something you can update us on in terms of how we're doing on that?
Mm-hmm. In terms of, we have budget challenge sessions on a quarterly basis with all directors and cabinet members to go through and check that we're making progress on all the savings targets, whether they're targets that were agreed as part of the budget process, the targets that or actions that were agreed during the year as part of monitoring reports. So we put all those together. The main exceptions at the moment would probably, and mainly about timing issues. There's a whole series of measures in adult services, savings that have been agreed around income maximisation, the digital offer, modernisation of daycare, etc., where I think Ian Baines is confident about delivering those savings, but the timing is such that they probably won't come in their entirety this year. But we're monitoring those on an ongoing basis. Outside of that, there are pressures around in terms of savings delivery on, again, due to timing on things like the community infrastructure levy on planning, which will be delivered once the local plan is delivered. So those are probably the main exceptions at this stage. Every other one, which I haven't mentioned, we're somewhere very close to delivering what was planned in terms of the budget savings. So, as I say, I just mentioned there the exceptions. I think you can take it from that, where we've got savings in place in other areas, we are delivering on those.
Because it's not just, with all due respect, it's not just a financial issue, is it? It is directorates, for example, where CYP have problems, and there's a reference in there to the pressure on early years intervention and safeguarding budgets. Having been on CYP scrutiny and so on, and I'm sure other councillors are just as aware, you're building up problems for yourself in the longer term, high budget issues. If you're struggling with pressure on early intervention and safeguarding, because what that tends to do is to generate you problems further down the line, which is not good for the young people and parents involved. But equally, it's not good from a financial point of view because it generates more expenditure. It's a very difficult, almost intractable situation, isn't it? And I suppose to a large extent, it's not so much the accounting people who can determine that. They can highlight it, but it's back to the individual directorates to do things about that and recognise it. Sorry, I'm rambling a little bit, but I'm just aware of that very serious issue when it comes to not quite getting where we should be.
Okay, would you like
and
to
I'm not sure what you
come
can
back
say
on that? All right. I think you're absolutely right in terms of, I think the council has tried to ensure that it puts the resources into the kind of the front end in terms of the intervention, so to maintain that spending. I'm sure through your time and others through Scrutiny panel, in particular children's services, then that has been highlighted. The additional cost that's reflecting in the accounts, if you like, is mainly in relation to things like the number of placements, and in particular external placements. And again, you'll be aware of the steps, the actions that the council's trying to take in terms of procuring more in-house residential care for children that will hopefully deal with part of that. I don't think that's the panacea for it. But equally, there's a lot of work going on, as again, you'll be aware, around the fostering team to try and recruit more foster carers, which again has a financial impact down the line in terms of the more children we can get into foster care, the reduction in terms of external placement costs. So, but it's a big pressure that nationally, as you know.
Yeah. Fair enough. I've got a sudden flurry of hands. I've got Sue, Bob, Dan, and Stephen in that order, I think. Sue, do you want to come in first on it?
I hate to be picky, Councillor Evans, but I don't like being called Sue.
My apologies.
I'm sorry to make a point of it, but I've been doing it for 60 years, so I'm not going to stop doing it now. Right. It's okay. There's so much in this report that is obviously going to cause challenges. I think challenges, difficulties, whatever you want to call it. The challenges posed by COVID are not going to go away. I wanted just to zoom in on one, I suppose, because it's one I suppose I would have taken particular interest in, and that was really it's extremely worrying to note the issues in relation to parking and the income. And I did have the correct paragraph, which was 5.6.4 parking services and waste management. We're not going to get the income we used to get from parking services because people aren't going to be. I mean, the world has changed. Waste management, that's probably going to get more difficult because more people are actually staying at home and probably producing more waste. So it's just an observation, really, that in terms of fulfilling the green agenda, but also if we're not going to recover the income that we used to, what are our options other than increasing parking charges, stepping up enforcement? I'm kind of glad I don't have to resolve these issues, because I just wondered whether any officers had any thoughts on this, because in many ways some of these issues are going to be irreconcilable. Yeah. I'm just wondering, had there been any kind of modelling done, or number crunching, and how are you going? How you possibly get anywhere near where we used to be? Because you can't.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know whether everybody can answer that. Certainly one of my notes on here, Susan. So you're ahead of me on that one, which is good. And my note is alternative income streams ? Yeah. Nigel, you were going to come in, I think.
Yes, it's kind of preempting, I suppose, possibly my next appearance at this scrutiny board, in terms of when I'll be hopefully presenting the medium-term financial strategy for next year and for over the 3-year period. which will need to take into account the fact that parking income, clearly as it stands at the moment, is not going to return to the levels that it did pre-pandemic. What we will do as part of the medium-term financial strategy is look at those different scenarios to say, well, if at the moment it is 60% of what it was previously, then can we anticipate it might be back to 80% by the end of next year, and so on. But look at those options to see what the implications of that are. And then the choices as part of the budget process will be to either address that shortfall in parking, for example, directly through other things relating to parking, so increases in charges, different charging systems, different powers, etc., or just generally as part of the budget process by finding alternative savings somewhere else. We have, again, without going through the whole of the medium-term financial strategy, we did set aside some funding as part of the MTFS last year to take into account losses of income. But I think it's fair to say that this time last year, we were anticipating that income levels would recover probably quicker than they are doing at the moment. So we'll review all that, and as I say, be part of the next report, which will be about what does this look like next year.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, point taken. Bob, I've got you next on my list.
Yes, thank you. Just picking up a couple of points, because obviously of previous involvement and interest on the report back on adult services. I note again, all age disability, as it says, continues to be the main cost pressure, so that's no surprise. I mean, people might not be aware that sometimes this is not spelt out just where those real pressures are, and they're not necessarily although there are increased demand for services from older people. A lot of those pressures are on younger people, especially people with learning disabilities. It's adding to quite considerably to those funding costs. So it is wide based amongst quite a lot of areas contained in the all age disability envelope. So I'm aware of what it says and what actions are being taken, but it is obviously an ongoing concern that these pressures still there. And also the following paragraph regarding the additional funding costs met by the CCG on the early discharge from hospital. It says here that it's likely to be phased out and possibly that funding being finished this month. So if I could just ask Nigel, is that likely to be the case now, and just what are the cost consequences of that funding not being available for later, the future months? Because obviously it is a concern. It is really an important area, is this, and the funding implications may be quite significant.
Yeah, apologies, I was smiling there in that obviously there was an announcement yesterday from the Prime Minister about additional funding for the NHS and social care. There's clearly some additional funding in the current year for the NHS. I haven't got the detail. I haven't seen the detail other than what was obviously publicly available yesterday as to how much of that might be, for example, to support those early discharges from hospital. Hopefully, part of that funding might be allocated towards continuing with that funding until the end of this financial year at least. But I'm not aware of whether that's actually been made explicit yet. Certainly, I haven't seen it personally.
Okay. Moving on then, Dan, I think you are next. Dan's all right rather than Daniel. Sorry, Susan.
Whatever you want. Whatever you want. Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Nigel, for the report. What I wanted to ask about, and it relates to a small service relative to some of the large budgets that are within here, but it comes to planning. And I thought that might be an example in terms of the wider case of services whose budgets aren't necessarily in line with the reality of perhaps that they're in, or perhaps they've seen significant changes over the past 18 months. Appreciate it's made ways of working for some services much easier, but in certain areas, and I think Michelle gave us a good example with the election service, some things have become much more challenging. and how we support services like planning. And I picked that one up because it's one of those very forward-facing ones where we get a lot of contact as councillors where the service is stretched. But how do we support that service to find a way to know what its budget really is in amongst the sort of the idea of what we've got in terms of income streams and one-off costs, but how we make sure that that service is meeting a financial priority, but very importantly, a service priority too.
Good point. Yeah. Don't know if there's any instant answer to that, is there, Nigel? Or
You'll see on the revenue monitor that there's a forecast overspend on planning in the current year. Most of that relates to one-off costs in relation to the local plan. But I'm aware, obviously, from what you just said, that that it's something we're going to have to look at the underlying budget as well for the planning service. Whilst it's not necessarily showing up as an overspend or underspend at this stage, as you quite rightly point out, circumstances have changed, and we need to look at what the underlying cost of running the planning service will be again after things have settled down post-pandemic. But it's something that's on my list, and I've been already talking to the director about kind of reviewing that service and the budget that goes with it to make sure it's still at the right level. We need to do that in advance of the budget process. Well, certainly that would be ideal. And then if there are any adjustments required to the planning budget, it can be done as part of that process rather than, I say, after we've agreed something for the next financial year. So my aim is to work with the directorate to try and produce something so we know what the underlying position and requirement moving forward for the planning services and its budget.
Okay, thanks for that. Stephen, finally getting around to you, and I've also noted Kate wants to come in as well.
Thank you, Chair. And just for the record, I don't like being called Sue either.
Do you not?
No, I don't. Anyway,
I told you, Steve.
Item 2 on my little list, it concerns something that was said earlier. I did, I think, discuss this earlier this week with Nigel. And that is, I hope that we're not looking to increase general revenue of this council by putting up parking charges. It's just been discussed. Everybody knows here that those charges are hypothecated for highways, and that's where any charges should go. And we shouldn't look to those income streams to bail out the real income streams of this council. It's not allowed. Moving on. Secondly, it was just mentioned by Dan Sutherland, and I agree with him. There's definitely something wrong with planning. I did mention this at the last full council meeting. You may not recall, but I did. And there's definitely something wrong, but I'm not convinced that it necessarily throwing more money at the problem will make it go away. It could help. It could be the total solution, but I think we need to go and look at it with a blank piece of paper to find out what's been going on. We all have a vested interest in seeing it working properly, and it simply isn't. So, Nigel, we visited this at midterm, these reports, and I do think you do a capable job, despite some of the comments I make. I really do. At this meeting, we've talked about presentations and some of the tables being a bit difficult to understand, where we don't know whether low is good or low is bad, and they're all mixed up and jumbled. I think you did say that you were going to put that right, and I think that I've seen evidence that that's already started. But there were other comments made at the midterm that hopefully we can take up, because I think for this particular scrutiny board, of all of them, we need to get the terminology spot on so we know exactly what we're talking about. And I was very pleased to see you quoted in the press this week about the importance of maintaining our reserves, the £5 million figure. And that is exactly what I've been talking about here and elsewhere. and unallocated balances don't really have a great significance in that statement. Absolutely solidly with you that it's reserves that matter. So I'd like to hope anyway that going forward, if we're talking about reserves, we're talking about the money that is the minimum amount that we need to have available in case something terrible happens. And as I understand it, presently, our reserves are at that level, the lowest level. So that when some portfolio holders refer to using money from reserves to fund things right now, that shouldn't be a concept that exists in the present circumstances. And basically that's it, Nigel. Thanks for the report. It's very good as always, but I do think the presentation ought to be improved so there's no ambiguity whatsoever in what's being presented to this board. Thank you.
Do you want to come back on that, Nigel? Or
No, I'm happy to take up any points about presentational issues. If there are ways we can improve the reports, that's absolutely fine. The reports are here for you to understand them as easily as possible. So if we can make any improvements to them, we should do so.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah. Jacob, your turn. You've been sat there very patiently.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to speak. Did have a couple of points to make. Firstly, echo the sentiments of Councillor Sutherland and also Councillor Stephen Lee, that there is a problem with the planning department at the moment, and it does need to be looked at. I think it might be that throwing more money at it doesn't work. But I think it does need to be looked at. But I think certainly some of the reasons why people in the planning departments are leaving is because they're getting job offers from other councils where they're being offered more money. And I know a specific example of that just recently happened. So I think, looking at that as the overall picture and potentially putting more budget into it could solve some of those issues. But I know planning is a problem in general. So I'll just echo the sentiments there of Councillor Lee and Councillor Sutherland. Also, with regard to parking charges, again, echo what Councillor Lee has said, that it would be a terrible situation to increase the parking charges to strengthen the revenue of the council. So I think we should avoid that at all costs. But my question actually now just related to the something you mentioned about how the overspend has been reduced, because you said the overspend had been related to lots of different things, but one of the things you said was COVID, adult social care, social care, COVID-related social care for adults. And you said that this overspend had been reduced by COVID grants from the government that the council actually had received. But I remember in the last meeting that we had, you said that those COVID grants, because we had a bit of a debate about this, you said those COVID grants in the government formed part of the reserves and were propping up the reserves. So my question is, if those COVID grants from the government have now been spent to reduce the overspend, does that mean the reserves are now even less than what they were at the last meeting?
I think the short answer to that is yes, and certainly by year end the reserves will be less than they were at the start of the year. But those reserves, they are earmarked reserves for specific purposes to deal with COVID related costs. So we always expected to have to apply those. So this is why I say sometimes the reserves will fluctuate, they'll go up or down because they're there for specific purposes. And those reserves for COVID related costs will be utilised this year. I mean, there was one other reserve that I mentioned last time, which is in relation to business rates, where in effect the funding was given in advance. That was carried forward and will be used again this year. So reserves will go down, but for good reasons, because that funding is being used for the purpose that it was intended. So what it does do means that there's kind of less flexibility, I suppose, and that we've still got the general balances, the £5.8 million for unforeseen things, and we've got reserves for specific purposes. So those will go down, but the other authorities nationally that have had problems with budget pressures and have had absolutely nothing in reserve to deal with those issues. Our reserves are at a low level, and I've remarked upon this many times, and we should try and keep them up as much as possible. But where they are for specific purposes, then I would expect them to be used. If the council chooses to try and replenish those reserves and get them back up to that level, then that would need additional savings to be identified, and that would have to be done as part of the budget process.
Okay, thanks for that. Victoria, Councillor Porridge, you had your hand up.
Just a point of information, really. I know our planning's come up a few times, slightly unexpectedly this evening. As a chair of planning, I thought I'd better pipe up. Just to let members know that planning has been and is undergoing an external review at the moment, which started, 2 or 3 weeks ago, I think, and waiting for the report to be prepared and returned to us. We had not the planning meeting yesterday, but the one 3 weeks ago was observed, and there's been all sorts of processes going on with regard to lots of interviews and the planning department being reviewed externally. So expect to hear more about that later, but it is being done, it is being looked at, and the department as a whole and how it functions is being looked at. Thanks.
Okay, interesting. Thanks, Victoria. Councillor Dacre, Sylvia, you've had a hand up as well.
If members have finished, is there anybody else wanted to say anything?
Couldn't see anybody else.
Okay, right, thank you, Chair. Yes, I just wanted to reassure councillors Lee and Ogden that no decisions have been taken about parking yet, but we all understand that parking fees are hypothecated, and if parking fees were to rise at any time in the future, we all know that they do have to be used in relation to highways and indeed other parking costs. So there's never been any suggestion that they are going to be used for anything else, and it would be inappropriate and impossible for us to do that. Just in relation to planning, Councillors Lee and Ogden say that, well, they're not sure that money is the problem, but in fact, Councillor Ogden's really put his finger on one of the issues we do have in this council, which is we are a small council. Our salary levels tend to be lower than adjoining councils, and of course we're surrounded not only by other West Yorkshire councils, but Lancashire, Greater Manchester are within easy reach of people. And so not just in planning, but in other areas as well, there is a risk, and it does happen, that we lose staff who go to better paid jobs in other authorities, never mind to jobs elsewhere, either in the public sector or in private business where they can earn more. So from that perspective, it is about money. And if we were able to pay our officers, not just in planning, but in across the board at a higher level, then we might not have some of the difficulties that we have when staff leave us for more. And of course, at the moment, we are simply not in a position to think about increasing scales across the council, because we'd simply have to get rid of a lot of staff in order to pay even fewer staff more. So it's not possible, and we have to work within those limits. But I think it does highlight how money is indeed an issue, not just in planning, but across the board.
Okay, I think we have to take your point. And if there are no other questions for Nigel or comments, I'll thank Nigel for his contribution this evening, and thank you for dealing with all the buffeting, shall we say, of comments in your usual calm and manner. So thank you for that, and we'll see you at least medium-term financial strategy then. Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on then to item 7. This has a very long title: Local Authority Enforcement Powers and Amendment under COVID-19, looking at how we dealt with any problems which occurred during the COVID period to date. And I think that, Ian, you're going to present this report for us.
Yes, thank you, Chair. My apologies, members. You should have received earlier today a briefing note setting out the background to the processes that have been in place to deal with the various issues that were required throughout the pandemic period to ensure that there was compliance with the myriad of regulations that were imposed upon us all at various times. My thanks to Derek, who's on the meeting, and his team for pulling that together. And again, I'm finding myself in a position where I'm going to have to praise a second team that we have within the council for the approach that's been taken in dealing with the issues that have been presented through the pandemic to ensure that, as far as possible, the residents of the borough were protected from the exposure to the virus in circumstances where there was a recognition of important times. And I think we've all recognised the commitment that the vast majority of the public have made to doing that, but also then the commitment that's highlighted in the report to the way in which the team that Derek is responsible for has worked with our partners, particularly the police, health, and others, and public health particularly, in ensuring that they apply those regulations as appropriately as possible. I won't go through the report, members. I'll take questions, as will Derek, on any issues that arise. But I think it well sets out the approach that was not new to us in setting up the partnership working that we knew we needed to follow in dealing with this. I think the report makes it very clear that, by and large, the police were responsible for ensuring that members of the public, individuals that is, dealt with the compliance with the various regulations that were imposed upon them as individuals. The council, in working with its partners, taking advice from public health, ensured that we were responsible for looking after the businesses and the retail establishments that were frequented by individuals at various times and in very different ways, to ensure that they were doing what they could to ensure that their environments were as safe as possible on the occasions that we were all allowed to use them. The report very clearly sets out the approach that was taken, the 4 E's, that is to ensure that we were working with businesses. We recognise obviously the impact that this had on them, and the last thing that we wanted to do was to not approach that in a very sensitive and empathetic way, to make sure that they understood what they needed to do, and we would educate them where they didn't, to engage with them and to encourage them to do what was required, and if necessary then to enforce the regulations when it was apparent that there was just a reluctance on the part of businesses to ensure that they did that. There are some worked examples given in the report. And as I said, hopefully it does set out a very good flavour of the approach that this council has taken, and members will, I'm sure, have noted that the way in which we approached matters was picked up by the LRF, the Local Resilience Forum, as an exemplar for other West Yorkshire authorities to follow the lead that we gave in ensuring that the approach was both in line with the regulations, but recognising the need to protect businesses, but also individuals as much as possible. Chair, hopefully that's a summary of the report. As I said, I'm more than happy to take questions, and I'm sure Derek will be too.
Thank you, Ian. I'll jump in on the first one, and you've got a little table on the 4 E's: engage, explain, enforce, and so on, and it indicates that there are 7,496, about 7,500 businesses which were visited. Can I ask why you chose to visit them? What instigated the visit, or was it just a general going out and talking to businesses?
it was a combination of intelligence-led visits from members, from council members who were concerned about the way in which there was perhaps an operation or a way in which a business was operating. A lot of the visits were required or requested by businesses themselves to ensure that they were doing what they needed to do properly. And then the others, probably the majority of them, were just in line with the need to ensure that we were doing what we needed to do. I think all licensed premises particularly were visited at one time, some on more than one occasion. So it was a combination of those three things, really: intelligence, requests, and just a general requirement, really, from Derek's team to make sure that that we went and visited all well, as many businesses as possible.
Okay, thank you. Jacob, you've got your hand up.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I read the report, and I understand it was a very difficult time for everybody in the country, and particularly councils were having to respond, at short notice to what was being said by central government, and having to set up bodies and work as in partnership. And I think the council does have to be complimented for having strong links with the police in place and the partnerships already in place in order for them to respond as quickly as they did. So I would agree that it was a difficult time, and the response by the council was, I think, on the whole, as Ian has said, to be praised. One thing I did pick up on in the report, though, that wasn't mentioned, and this was a particular concern of mine, was certainly regarding enforcement action enforcement action that related to the issuing of fines, because in the report it mentions that there was enforcement action in terms of closing businesses down for a while, closing hospitality sector businesses down, or giving them warnings, but there was no mention at all in the report about how fines were issued, or sort of how fines played into the whole enforcement process, because there was no mention of sort of the level of fines. So whether it's £1,000, 5,000, 10,000, what was the level of fine that were issued? What was the decision-making process for issuing those fines? So would, for example, they be given a warning and then you say you get a fine? They were issued a fine before as an enforcement action, or was it sort of issued at the end? It's just a bit unclear how fines were issued, and the whole process about that. So that was just one concern that I had, because I can't disagree with what's in the report, because it's pretty clear that you engage with people, you told them what they should do, you helped them, etc. And then in the enforcement examples in the report are the businesses was shut down or had to close for a while. So that seemed fairly fair, because people then were given opportunity before the business was closed to make necessary changes. And also the report says once those changes were made by the business, you visited them again while they were closed, and if they'd made the necessary change, then they were allowed to reopen. So which again, all seems very fair, but it was just the fine issue where it seems that at a time when a lot of hospitality sectors, businesses were struggling, tend to be made to pay money over to the council for something they'd done wrong, which, as you mentioned, could have been an easy mistake to make. It was a difficult set of regulations that had to abide by, and so very easy to make COVID-related mistakes in terms of all the guidelines they had to follow. Then to be given a fine does seem rather unfair. So I wonder if you could just address that, Ian, how that was dealt with.
Happy to, Councillor. I'll bring Derek in a second, because he will have some detail. But perhaps what should have been mentioned in the report, which isn't there, is obviously any issuing of a fine is in compliance with the ethos that's described in the briefing. It's going to be a situation that arises at the end of that process. It is not something that's going to be imposed in the first instance. It will be very much a case of last resort, because if we have a business that is failing to engage, failing to understand the engagement that we're looking to have with them to ensure that they are operating safely, then in line with many other regulations and regimes that we have, where unfortunately a punitive element of a financial penalty is imposed should someone fail to engage or fail to adhere to what they're asking to do. Then that is not out of line with the way in which those systems work in very many other areas of enforcement that we deal with and than other regulatory authorities deal with. So it would not have been a case at any stage that we'd have gone straight to issuing a fine for a minor infringement, or any for a major infringement come to that. It would have come at the end of the process, where someone was just failing to engage or failing to do what they were asked to do under the powers that are available to the council and the public health element of the council, particularly in circumstances where we have a duty to protect the public. And if we find that someone is unwilling to engage with us in following the regulations and following the advice that we give, then a fine will have to be imposed, and that's in strict accordance with the way in which the regulations allow us to do that. But Derek, if you could perhaps just elaborate on Councillor Cook, you're right, the level of fine can amount to about £1,000, but Derek will explain a little bit more about that.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you for the question, Councillor Cook. First thing to remember is that Calderdale was under some form of restriction from day one, and has only just come out as a result of the roadmap. So unlike a lot of other areas, we were under some form of regulations throughout that whole probably 14, 15 months. The regulations changed on a regular basis, and the first regulations that we got under the first national lockdown actually just placed an ability for us to close premises what were prohibited. So, for example, if premises were not allowed to open and they did open, we went in and we issued a prohibition notice to close the premises down. And there was no option around a fine at that stage. As the regulations changed alongside the journey on the roadmap, additional powers came in to take action. But as Ian has rightly said, and if you've got any concerns about any individual premises, we have extensive records which we can go into, which will show you how we use the 4E's approach in terms of making sure that anything we did was justified, it was proportionate, it was reasonable, and it was within the regulations. We realised that businesses were having a very difficult time, but I have to say a lot of the intelligence we got came from other businesses who were complying, who were either closing or working to the restricted practices, who were particularly annoyed and perplexed by activities of just a very small number of premises. So when you look at the figures, so we issued overall 23 fixed penalty ticket notices out of 7,500 visits. So it gives you a sense, really, we were dealing with really a small number of premises, but I'm more than happy to have a conversation offline and give you the detail that gives you the reassurance that we did behave proportionately, reasonably and lawfully. Sorry, just to your point about the fines, in the later stages of the regulations, the fines were very steep, I have to say. We didn't set those are not locally determined. They were determined by the regulations, in other words, by the government. And actually, there was an escalation. So if a business then failed to respond to the first fixed penalty ticket notice, the alternative then, or the option then, was to actually take further action, which doubled the fine. And I'm afraid there was some quite steep fines given out during that period of time, but that tariff was not determined by us locally. It was set by the government nationally. So we had to follow their guidance, well, their legislation, to be honest.
Yeah, thanks for that. Just to come back on that. So if there was businesses that felt aggrieved or felt they'd been unfairly dealt with, they would be able to write to yourself, and you would give them the records of how the enforcement action was taken, and we'd be able to show that that was justified and proportional then?
Yeah, it's a very strange one. There actually wasn't a right of appeal as such. Normally, there is sometimes a right of appeal to, say, a magistrate's court or something of that nature. There was an ability to air their concerns to the government. There was an ability to air their concerns to the council, which did happen, and we did respond to a number of businesses that raised their concerns, and we articulated our position. We certainly worked with partners, particularly Ian's legal team, who I know he's thanked my team. I have to say that the support given to us by the legal services was just unbelievable, because these were really swift changing pieces of legislation that you had to get your head round, and we had to do it knowing that what we were doing was acting within the bounds of the regulations. So yeah, everyone who raised issues with us, some didn't, we responded to, and we spoke to, and we explained our decision, which actually we weren't required to do, but we felt that was a proportionate response given that these were difficult times.
And I think it's appropriate there, perhaps, Jacob, that Derek has offered offline to talk about any specific cases that you're concerned about. And
absolutely, I don't want to bring specific cases into it, but I would welcome the opportunity, Derek. That would be fantastic. Thank you. Yeah. Okay,
good. I've got Dan and then Bob. I've noted. Dan, do you want to go first?
Sure. Thank you, Chair. I'd start by saying, before I get into the local stuff, on an individual basis, I've had some significant concerns with the government's lockdown strategy in terms of its concept and its application, and the mitigation of the wider impacts that it's had. And I think the fines that have come up were one of those that I found quite challenging in terms of the scale and the impact that it might have on individuals or businesses, in terms of it being a proportional fine, in terms of how some others are, like a speeding fine or other fines that you come up against. So I think there have been some areas that have been very challenging, and the announcements of new policies on the hoof, appreciating the fast-moving nature of things, but I think often what went out sometimes at 10 o'clock on Newsnight didn't necessarily match up with the powers that either council officers or police officers had to actually enforce things. So I think that at points there was a great deal of confusion amongst the general public as well as professionals about what was actually allowed, what wasn't allowed. I think that probably would have led to a lot of reporting about things that were perhaps allowed at points, and they may have changed, and it may have led to some frustration. But I do think that locally, that Calderdale has been an example, frankly, as a local authority, where they have really made an effort to work in partnership, and I think importantly understand the impact on different groups. So young people's referenced in there, but the different communities across Calderdale, and really, as the case study said, trying to work as much as possible in those first 3 E's before it goes anywhere else. My question to Derek is about the longer term community impact, or how we sort of are now. So we've had neighbours reporting neighbours, businesses reporting businesses, the council having to very much go out with its enforcement face on in many ways, and have a lot more interactions with businesses and individuals on that basis. How do you feel like the situation is now? As I said, I think the council's done very well in bearing in mind those issues with the community, but do you feel like that we're in a good place in terms of the relations with businesses and the community, or do you think that there's still some work for us to do before we sort of recover from that and bring back more of that community feeling, which I think was a bit at risk at points?
Thank you, Councillor Sutherland. I think we really try to make positive inroads in with our relationship with businesses, and I think using pub watches, for example, which have been in existence prior to COVID, really helps. And I think is on the report, there's an example of a letter that went out to all businesses. So lots of those visits that were mentioned were actually where we went out at key step changes of legislation to engage with every business to say to them, by the way, this is what's coming, this is what's going to be required. Are you happy? Well, not happy, sorry. Are you happy that you've got your house in order? Is there any advice we can give you? So there was a tremendous effort, not just by my team, wider partnerships, across the whole services and organisations in Calderdale.
I think it's fair to say the community tension hasn't manifested itself in the same way that you would get if there was a major incident within a community. What we have seen is an incredible increase in the number of what I call the doorstep issues. People now are working and staying at home more than they used to do, and they become now more aware of what are the doorstep issues. We've seen significant increase in reporting of environmental nuisance. We've seen antisocial behaviour change from what has been traditionally almost, shall I say, a young person or a town centre, nighttime economy type of issue into tolerance issues around neighbours and that type of concern that often manifests itself as people are sort of locked down, for want of an expression, in their neighbourhood. But also with it, there's a pride that's growing out of this around their place and our place. There's no longer a tolerance of, we don't like that. Why is that happening? Why are we getting fly tipping? Why is somebody littering? Nobody. Why is it a small minority spoiling it for a majority? So what my service is now having to deal with, having come out from a lot of the COVID compliance, and we're still supporting public health, we're still doing the work around supporting businesses and events, etc. What we have met with is certainly after the first 6 months of the pandemic, a significantly increase in what I call the doorstep issues. And I think that's gonna, I think Nigel was talking about things settling down and trying to understand what a post-COVID climate might look like. I think that's very much for us. We're not sure if this is just a short-term to medium-term issue. I have to say, looking at the figures, I get a sense that actually people are saying enough's enough and we want local action. The difficulty is, and just we've been talking about planning services, who I work very closely with, is we do only have a finite number of resources, and the issues that are being reported are not your traditional crime and disorder matters. I think maybe looking around the table here, I think there's every elected member here, maybe about one or two that I've had a conversation with over the last recent 2 or 3 months about issues in their area. So I think community tension is probably the wrong word, but there is certainly a community dissatisfaction, and also with that, a pride around their place and wanting to make a difference. And I think it's about how we work with communities to not only deal with those that actually present the problems, but also we work on trying to change the culture and behaviour in those communities. So I don't know if that quite answers your question, Councillor, but I think it's manifesting itself so much like anything else with the pandemic. It's manifesting itself in a little bit more of a sophisticated way than simply tension following an incident in a town centre or in a ward.
Thank you, Derek. That certainly does, and I can definitely relate in terms of my inbox since lockdown began. I think probably every councillor might.
Yeah, absolutely.
Clicking emails.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I would agree with a lot of the stuff that both of you said there in terms of how it's happened in our ward. There's people complaining about people, and why aren't you doing something about them then? But then the rules have changed, and it's just messy, isn't it? It really is messy. I think overall you've probably done a pretty good job given the circumstances that are there. Anyway, Bob, you got your hand up.
Yes, yeah, thank you, Chair. I just want to comment and to say, just as a ward councillor, I think out of the last few months it's been really useful using the kind of organisational things we have in place to be able to get proper feedback and to be able to feed into issues on this. I'm particularly thinking of things like, speaking as a town walk councillor, the town centre SCG, the Halifax Town Centre SCG. Obviously the Halifax Town Centre being one of the biggest nighttime economies in Calderdale, as well as retail and other areas. So it's been good to be able to discuss, and there's a regular slot on that agenda to be able to discuss these kind of issues and get feedback from the police and others on this. I'm thinking also particularly of the Development Board, Halifax Town Centre Development Board, again with some of the main traders, etc., main businesses that come and discuss issues. We have a slot on there to feedback on any COVID-related matters, particularly regarding licences, etc., which likewise with the Town Centre Board. So these kind of areas, and there's the wider role of the other CCG, the Central Halifax one. So we get plenty of opportunity, I think, to be able to get some real up-to-date information and the opportunity to discuss it with the attendees and follow things through that way, as well as obviously individual matters that you take up any day, any way as a ward councillor. But they've been really useful, I think, of these parts of the agendas. It's been happening over the last 12 months or so in this matter. Okay, Bob, you think it's an observation rather than asking a question? Yes, it's an observation. Thank you for that. Stephen, you've got your hand up as well.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd just like to agree with Derek about some of his very astute, I think, and accurate comments about what's going on. You've called it, I think your terminology was doorstep issues, something like that. I call it, forgive my terminology, but there's a strange sort of Wild West sort of attitude going on here. Like, you know, some of the things we've seen with parking up in, you know, in my ward, blocking roads, parking, leaving litter everywhere, leaving gates open, having barbecues and setting fields on fire. You know, some very irresponsible behaviour. And I genuinely think, Derek, that you do have an extraordinarily difficult task ahead. It seems that we've moved in some horrible way. I don't know what it is. And Dan's quite right with the things he's mentioned. But I just think there's so many different things to deal with at the moment. So many new problems that are going our way. I don't think, people might argue that it's been a lot worse than this, and perhaps it has. But I don't think we've had such complex issues to deal with across the board as that are arising. And you're quite right, I've spoken to you, you know that. And you know that particular problem, which I won't mention now, is a very strange attitude. It's beyond comprehension what's going on. So I want to say that I and my party are behind everything that you're trying to do, and the very best of luck with it, because you've got some tremendous challenges, and good luck with it all. I don't envy the task ahead for you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And I don't think there are any other hands raised at the moment. So it just remains for me to thank Ian and Derek for their contribution on this one. Never an easy one to deal with, is it, Derek? We know a lot. Why do you do what you do? You know, because you're always in the middle, aren't you? Between people, yeah. Okay, so thank you very much for that one. And we'll move on to the last major item on the agenda, which is item 8, which is headed Payday Loans, a draft terms of reference that we're looking at here. You may well have seen an email which I forwarded to board members from Councillor Lee about his concerns in relation to this draft terms of reference. I think we just have to be a bit careful with these things, that we just don't make them too political, and that we don't, you know, get too carried away by who said what, or he said that, or we said this and you said the other, and that sort of thing. I think the reason this has come to scrutiny is because it's a problem, and it may be a broader problem than the headline suggests, and that we as a group of people want to try and do something about that. And so I'd like to approach this issue from that point of view. But I did say to Councillor Lee that I'd give him an opportunity to briefly comment in relation to his email to set the ball rolling on this particular one. So away you go, Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. I will indeed be brief. I don't wish this to be political either. I'll tell you what I think, and I don't know whether we can reach some agreement on this. I think this is a very complex problem, and it's not just the payday loans, as you know. We wanted to set the bar higher than just payday loans and deal with the whole gamut of debt and the way that people are getting into debt. And indeed, a lot of the problems are because of illegal lending, which is far more pernicious than payday loans. At least they purport to be, you know, reputable companies. What I'd be very happy to do to define these terms of reference properly and potentially save some time for everybody, I'd be very, very happy to work with Mike Parks and with Ashley or James Baker, cross-party, to just see if we can expand the terms of reference a little further from what's been put before us this evening. And as part of that, you know, I would undertake to have a quick meeting, quick by soon as possible meeting with Mike and yourself, Ashley, if you're in agreement, to just define these more carefully. Try and let's cover all of the things that we need to do, not just a single aspect of it. And I would propose that we could send those round as a draft idea to members of this group so that we can get a clear go-ahead to work along some defined terms of reference that is a firm starting point that we'll all be happy with. So that's all I wanted to say, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Appreciated. And Susan, you, I think, got the hand up first.
Sorry.
Fire away.
I'm trying to.
Sign language.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I've got it. So I was pressing it. So yeah, I certainly had my hand up first. This was my portfolio, part of my portfolio for 4 years as a cabinet member. So if we're going to have any cross-party discussion, I would hope that an invitation would actually be issued to anybody who wished to take part from whichever party. This is a subject extremely close to my heart. I volunteer two food banks in Tomlin, and it's hard to talk about this without being political, isn't it? With a small p, perhaps. I've just had a news flash on my phone to say that Parliament has just got through to increase national insurance, which is going to affect an awful lot of people, most of whom are already struggling. The cut to universal credit, £20, is going to have a profound impact on people's lives, and I think it was entirely correct to identify that. So in short, I think that Councillor Lee is actually right to say that this is much wider now than payday loans. I don't know about anybody else, but I am continually inundated on social media with advertisements about equity release. And equity release is just, it might not be a payday loan, but it's actually a con going under the guise of releasing money. What it's actually about is taking out a loan on the equity of your house, and then you pay a massive amount, 3% interest on that. So you are actually in danger if you live long enough of losing your home. I think equity release is in the current situation we're in, should be added to the list of things to have a look at. And with the end of furlough coming up and all kinds of issues coming up, and to take the party politics out of it, and these are still issues, now this legislation is going to go through, these are issues that people are going to face on a daily basis, and it's important that we should identify that. I also wanted to say, if we're going to have a look at this and how we help people, that we have in the past, we had a very successful campaign around discretionary housing payment, where people were not taking up funding from the which was actually available from the government, and we did a big PR campaign and we targeted it, and our officers did an awful lot of work around it, and we contacted as many people as we could, and we actually found that we were spending the allocation which had previously been underspent. So we can do something similar in a constructive way, cross-party, around. I'd like to say it isn't just payday loans; it's actually profiteering from people who are suffering hardship. So maybe we can think of another umbrella term around that. But if we are going to have this discussion, I would most certainly like to join that discussion. But I'm not going to make any apologies for saying that what's happened tonight in Parliament is actually going to cause people an awful lot more hardship, and it shouldn't have happened.
Thank you, Susan. Mike, we've got both mics have got hands raised. Councillor Barnes, you were a keen advocate of this issue, so would you like to fire away, and I'll come on to Mike Lodge later, if that's okay.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I think as Mike and I attend a lot of meetings together, one of us needs to change our name, I think, just to avoid confusion.
Yeah.
I think, thank you, Chair. I'm not a member of this committee, but so thank you for the opportunity both to be here tonight and to speak. A couple of points. One, I'm not precious about this. This is something that, yeah, Councillor Lee is completely right about this to be a cross-party issue, and it does need, in my view, I think cross-party workings often produce better results. And I think it brings everybody in, and it avoids the unnecessary he said, she said type arrangement. So not precious if whether I'm on the working party or not, that's not what I'm about. What I really wanted to do was just actually say an apology to Councillor Lee. I actually did send this out in August. Unfortunately, I sent it to the wrong Stephen. I sent it to Councillor Baines instead of Councillor Lee. So I actually had previously sent this document out, or some of this documentation out before. So I'd like to offer Councillor Lee tonight in full view of everyone my apologies for sending it to the wrong individual. I'd like to say it was a long night that night. I don't know. I can't honestly remember. It was just an apology. So please accept my apology, Councillor Lee.
Mike, in the interest of working together cross-party, absolutely accept that apology. Thank you.
And so thank you, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Okay, thank you. Mike Lodge, do you want to come in on this one?
Thank you, Chair, and I think as everybody said, this draft sort of terms reference is a start to a discussion that obviously happy to have with anybody who wants to be involved. Perhaps one of the things we didn't make as clear as we could have done in the agenda papers was to ask you as a board whether you wanted to establish a working party to look at this piece of work, because I think everybody sees it as broader than just the payday loans. And there may be some discussions that you might want to have with people who are experiencing difficulties of debts that you obviously wouldn't want to do in public with them. So I would suggest that to the board that you may want to appoint a working party, including those people who've already sort of volunteered, and that group can be the group that can meet soon and pick up the points that Councillor Lee and others have made about the scope of the review. That's all I need to add, Chair.
Thank you for that. Any other comments on the proposal? I mean, basically, what? Oh, sorry, Susan, you've got your hand up as well. Did you want to come back in? No. Okay. I think that the most useful proposal that's come out of this, that sounds condescending, doesn't it? I think the most important thing that's come out of this is that we recognise it's much broader than that, and we want to get a group of people together and to discuss it and come up with a proposal. So really what we're looking at is a scrutiny party, working party, to look at this broader issue. And do we, in the first instance, ask Lauren and Mike to come up with a broader outline to throw at the group to agree on a brief to work forward? Mike, do you think that's something you could do for us to get us rolling again?
I could do. I think if it's what I'd like to suggest is that perhaps after the meeting, Laura and I write out to members of the board asking who would like to serve on the working party, and we work together on the broader terms of reference, because members have already talked about they have a lot of interest and experience. And I think if me and Laura work on it, we'll end up doing the exercise twice and set up a working party and get it going, and then we can report back as an interim with the revised terms of reference to this board formally.
So are our board members comfortable with that suggestion from Mike Lodge? Yeah, we're all happy with that. Good. Can we then say that as our conclusion for in relation to this particular item on the agenda, that we will set up a working party and that we will get the group together, work together to create our own brief and then report back eventually to the scrutiny board on that subject. We're happy with that? Good. Thank you very much on that one. And the final item is the work programme for the future. And there are a couple of items, I think, Lauren, might you want to refer to, which may be adding to the group?
Yeah, if I can, Chair, just briefly to say the people, assets and systems item, that's underway. So we're doing some work with Zora's service around when we can schedule that in. So the work programme you've got is the most up-to-date one. There's a couple of issues, one around capital and one on inequalities that we're thinking of building in. We've discussed with the Chair and Deputy, but I think Mike can probably expand on that a bit more. Batting it your way, Mike, I'm afraid.
Thank you, Lauren. And incidentally, Chair, I'm quite happy to change my name to anything that the board resolves.
Really?
We had a meeting. We had a meeting between the place chair, Councillor Caffrey, and Councillor Kavanagh wasn't able to make it. Councillor Caffrey and Sheila O'Neill, and they had a very useful discussion and briefing from Sheila O'Neill and Rob Summerfield about the capital programme. And when the capital monitor goes to cabinet, it's usually referred to this scrutiny board. But a lot of most of the implementation of the capital programme does take place in Sheila O'Neill's directorate. And so Councillor Caffrey was of the view that it'd be very useful to have the capital monitor at place scrutiny board. We discussed this. I discussed this with Councillor Evans and Councillor Metcalfe, and we said we'd bring this we'd raise this under this item at this meeting. Unless I think that's a good proposal, unless anybody on this board has any objections to it. I suppose what I would advise is it wouldn't be efficient to do it in two places. Is that we approach we talked to Nigel and Cabinet about referring it to the place scrutiny board in future.
I'd be comfortable with that, and I would also point out that it wouldn't stop members of this scrutiny board attending the place scrutiny board just to keep a feel of what's going on and keep in the loop on it. So you know, if we could do that, I'd be perfectly happy with that. But anybody else's views, happy to hear. Bob, you've got your hand up there.
Yeah, well, I do find this quite.
Megan. Yes.
Sorry, Megan before me.
Yeah, she was there actually. It's just
okay.
your picture's not there, Megan. So I keep forgetting.
Quiet. Yeah,
I'll come back to you, Bob.
My hands up. Yeah. It's been. Thank you. Yeah, my hand's been up so long. I think it was for the last item, not this. But the makeup of the group that you're talking about, I would suggest very clear thing that you go back to your groups and get them, once we know how many people are going on which, to decide who goes on it. It's, you know, it's the same as we've done on other groups. I don't want to go on it, which is very clear. And this last one, well, there doesn't seem to have been any talk about it at all, except in the background. I don't think they should go to place. I really don't. When's it gone to place in the past? You know, we could just, you know, it'd save us coming if we just gave them everything. So, and scrutiny and one thing or another, it just sounds as though it should be here. And, you know, it isn't good to have things in two places. We've done it before and we miss things. So, yeah, you went on and agreed that actually without me having a say or a vote. but not happy.
Right, understood.
No, it's
Bob.
not funny.
No, I know. But I'm just amused where you're presenting it. That's all. You know me. I laugh at all sorts of things. I'm daft, really. But there you go, Bob.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry, Megan. I just have to disagree a bit. I think with a busy work programme, and I do take the point. I do take the point that's being made that you know, we do have the bulk of the capital programme is in does really fall into that highways, etc. Just fall into that area of
really glad you're going, Bob.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I missed that.
Thank you.
And I think we do have a pretty full working agenda coming through over the next few months. And we do have the revenue that comes, the revenue monitoring. So I think I would support that we follow that suggestion on the capital programme. And it's a matter really for Cabinet to agree to forward it there instead of to us. So yeah. On that. Just going back at Megan did then, just on that previous discussion about a working party. Yeah, but I fully agree that should be happening. I just will be concerned if it gets too big, because I think working parties are best when, you know, they're not more than half a dozen. I'm not wanting to deter anybody for putting themselves forward, but it can get a bit unwieldy if a working party goes over a certain number.
Half a dozen is quite a good number. Just throwing a figure out in the air.
Yeah, sure. Half a dozen. Yeah.
Susan, you wanted to come in as well on this one, I think.
I'm having trouble with my... Sorry, I'm having trouble with my mute. And
I can hear you now.
As you can see, yeah. It was just to say, really, I'm not going to die in a ditch about it. I mean, if people, it's quite right to say that, you know, we can go along. I take it we're talking about physically going along, as we were told this was going to be the last scrutiny meeting on Zoom. I hope that's the case. My only comment would be that highways has, in the past couple of years, there has been an overlap between this directorate and the stuff that went to place. So that was my concern. I can see why Megan is concerned. I do know that, you know, there used to be bits that were place and bits that were S&P. But I suppose if people are interested, then they can go along to the place scrutiny. But I would hope it wouldn't particularly set a precedent.
Okay, yeah, point taken. So as far as the working group is concerned, we're happy to carry on down that route, and we're also happy for our majority in favour of going to place with the capital item. Can we? Are we happy with that? Nobody against? Yeah. Apart from Megan, perhaps. Sorry, Stephen, you wanted to comment.
The only thing here, this is really the first I've heard about it, and I've not had the opportunity to discuss the relative merits or otherwise of the move. And I would certainly like to have the opportunity to discuss it with my group privately before I make a decision today. So it is an important thing, and I'm sure we all want to do the right thing. So this really, I'm interested in some more opinions on this rather than me deciding this evening. Thank you.
Whether it should go to place or else?
Yeah, I'd be happy to report back to the chair, you know, at a reasonably early stage. But I do think that if it's news to me, it'll be news to the other members of my group, and there might be some strong feelings about it.
Okay. Mike, are you comfortable with us delaying it a little bit until we hear back from Stephen?
That's fine, Chair, yeah.
Okay.
Councillor Porritt would like to come in, please, Chair.
Please, sorry, Lauren. Yeah, fire away.
No, it's just for clarification, really. Are we talking about the capital monitor going to place as a permanent fixture, or are we talking about it being a specific report that's pertinent to place that's going this time? Just to clarify what we're exactly discussing.
The suggestion was that it'd be a regular fixture. That was the suggestion.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think, like Susan said, you know, not particularly prepared to die in a ditch over it. I think as long as it's being scrutinised somewhere, it's being scrutinised, and maybe sort of see how that goes in terms of separating out us scrutinising the revenue and places scrutinising capital, whether that works, whether it looks like it's too much of a too sort of fractured. And yeah, I appreciate what's been said around the difference of directorates, but yeah, it's maybe not that straightforward. I don't know. Any other views?
So you're abstaining on that one then?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's I don't know what the implications are, I suppose, is my point in terms of not really knowing sort of which way to jump with it. You know, are there implications to the different areas of finances being scrutinised in different places, or is it just a matter of, you know, we all just sort of watch and make sure it's ticking along? I'm just interested really as to the further implications of it.
Mike, can you respond to that particularly, do you think?
I mean, there's
with Councillor Caffrey.
I was sort of trying to have a look around to see how many people were left in the room and whether any of the public are watching. I think that an alternative thought, and perhaps we ought to go away and have another discussion between Councillor Evans and Councillor Caffrey, is that we ask Sheila O'Neill or Rob Summerfield to attend this scrutiny board for that discussion. They have at their fingertips detail. So to give you an example, without going into any great length, they talked about shortage of labour in the building industry and the impact on the capital programme and both the costs and the timescales of that. They talked about issues around that members are aware of the impact of shortages of steel and the shortages of HGV drivers on the capital programme. And they have detail at their fingertips about, for example, progress on Northgate House. So that the discussion was more about not whether the programme, if you like, balanced in terms of finances, but on the impact of the programme on local people and local businesses. But that discussion could take place here, but I think it would be better informed by having Nigel and by having either Sheila or Rob coming to this discussion.
Yeah. Okay.
So that decision, man.
Sorry, Megan, have you got your hand up there?
I've got my hand up, and once again, Ashley, I'm going to think you don't want me to speak in a bit. I would like to put a different proposal forward, because half of us didn't know this was coming up, and I suggest that we postpone any decision about what's happening to it. Well, we've had a chance to talk about it and what it means. I mean, when this was first put, when the scrutinies were first put together, everything to do with money and budgets, etc., was supposed to come here. Now, we can't often have them in more than one place, but, you know, let's not set rules that some of this funding money or whatever you want to call it goes to place as a thing. Not happy at all. And I certainly want to go back to my group and find out if they're happy. So.
Okay, so I think clearly there isn't sufficient support for just making a decision on it tonight, I'm afraid. So we need to have more discussion on it then, I think, before it becomes a formal part of our work programme or Places work programme. So let's leave that one and take on board the comments which people made and look at having more discussions before we finalise which way we're going to go on it. I think that's the easiest thing for tonight. Any other comments on the work programme, Mike, Lauren?
No.
Good. Okay. So can I thank everybody for being here, and our special regular guest, Councillor Barnes, on here, our regular visitor to this committee, and thank you all.
Thank you. Thanks,
Thanks, everybody.
See you next time.